Morning, everybody. Very nice to see everybody this morning on this Sublime morning. Sublime is the tea we're going to do today. What type of a week have we had this week? It's been busy. It's been really busy. All of you are going to start to see little shock waves go through the system because we're going through price increases. And part of this is driven is that we run out of stuff and try and procure new stuff to fill in. It's more expensive. So you'll start to see that. And we've already had that with things like silver needle and white peony and so forth. And you'll start to see that in some of the other replacements that we get for current stuff. So that's one thing to be aware of. The second thing to be aware of is in the tea world, there's lots of ripples because it's getting harder and harder for entrepreneurs to enter this area. And again, people are coming to us trying to get wholesale supplies for shops and so forth. So a lot of activity going on right now. Some of it very expected because we already knew that this was kind of the situation that was going on. The third thing of this week for us is we're getting closer to a plan for our trip. Our trip will most likely start in mid-March. And we'll give you the dates as soon as we have them, which should be by next week. And it's going to be a little bit longer than what I was originally telling you. I was originally telling you we're trying to keep it under 30 days. That clearly is not going to be the case. We've already added some destinations. We have some further opportunities to talk about in China and a few things more to do in Japan. All right. That's the prelude. Let's jump into Sublime. By the end of today's session, you will have actually tasted this tea. It's another tea from the Isla Mountains. You'll be able to compare it to previous teas that we've had in this 9-week series. So the two previous teas, last week we had Felicitas, and the week before Idyllic. And you're also going to walk away with history today that you don't know. History about the Tea Horse Road. Now, one apology and one note. So let's get the apology over with right away. Then I can move on to the note. Sorry that I forgot to send out the pictures last night. I had it all teed up and then didn't press that send button. And this morning was surprised you didn't have pictures yet. So I sent that out this morning, just in case you haven't checked your emails. More importantly, after those pictures, I sent you another email. Now, this other email is more significant because it's got a graphic, two graphics. One referring to something called the ancient Tea Horse Road. That's what we're going to be spending a lot of time on today. And then secondly, I sent you a leaf. Now, one of you is going to ask or attempt to ask in the next 60 seconds, what type of tea leaf is this? So let me dispel that right away. It's not a tea leaf. I'm actually using this as an analogy related to the ancient Tea Horse Road. And there's going to be a bigger picture that I'm going to talk to you about today, a significantly bigger picture, because when you think of Chinese culture, is it monolithic? Answer would be no. A person who comes from the north is different from somebody who comes from the south. A rural person is different than an urban person. A rural in southern China is very different than a rural in Yunnan. Now we're moving closer to home because our tea is from Yunnan. And so I'm about to make a point here. In the Canton province, for example, in the villages there, many of them were separated by geographical features. They vaguely knew that each other existed, but there was really little or no interaction. One of the shocking things about Yunnan, you talk about an isolated place. Yunnan, Tibet, Sichuan, all these places are geographically hugely isolated. Himalayas in Tibet, Pengdong Mountains in northern Yunnan, mountainous ranges in Sichuan, valleys in Sichuan, just this whole range of difficult geographical features. Now, generally, as a race or a peoples, if you're separated geographically, I would posit your culture will develop at a slower rate and be more conservative. If you are on a trade route, say the old Silk Road, or the ancient Tea Horse Road, different things happen. First off, nationalities intermingle. This is what happened in Yunnan. This is what happened in Tibet. What's the consequence of that? Oh, ideas float across. What sort of ideas? How about religious ideas start to float across? Ideas and arts and crafts and cultural traditions start to intermingle. This is what you see in these areas. And like I said, you can go to Canton Province and one village barely has any interaction with anywhere else. Culture is very conservative and very mono, so to speak. In other words, there's cultural thinking that's very united. You go to the Island Mountains, for example, you have 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 cultures intermingled. Different traditions, but everybody's side by side. They talk to each other. They eat each other's food. They intermarry. It's a different cultural fabric there. Now, I haven't uttered the word tea once yet. I'm getting there. You know, if tea were only spelled T-E-A-I, I would have gotten there right away. But without an A-I in tea, it's taking me a little bit longer. So I mentioned the Silk Road. The Silk Road was in the north, you remember. Chang'an, or today's Xi'an, was its terminus point. Or if you're in China, its starting point. And then it wandered through Central Asia, entered into or influenced things in Africa, in the Middle East, spices. The ancient Tea Horse Road, as you see on the map, goes in many directions. One direction is through Tibet. One direction is through Sichuan. Another direction is through Yunnan and Guangxi and into the heart of China. And another direction, set of directions, by the way, are in, and you don't see all of them, by the way. And we're going to look at that leaf in a minute to explain that, but not yet. Let's stay focused on the map, is into Southeast Asia. So you're going in all these directions. And in the early 1900s, in the late 1800s, you used to hear people refer to that as the Southern Silk Road. It was only later, actually in the early 2000s, that the name Ancient Tea Horse Road stuck. Why did it stick? Well, we have two words in there that are really important. Tea horse. Tea for horses. How much was a horse worth in the Tang Dynasty? Well, if it was a really great horse, it was worth about 230 pounds of tea. Now, for you jokers out there who say, well, wait a minute, was it 230 pounds of cliff tea, or was it 230 pounds of lousy central China tea? And the answer is, remembering at that time, I said the Tang Dynasty, it was all green tea. And 200 there, and there wasn't enough differentiation in terms of place and pricing. As more state controlled pricing, so you didn't have these wide swings of pricing that you have today. So that's why 230 pounds of tea was roughly 230 pounds of tea from anywhere. A less good horse was only worth about 120 pounds of tea. Still, when you think about it, that's an enormous amount of tea. Now, let's think a minute. What was a good horse used for? A 230-pound horse used for? 230 pounds of tea, not the horse 230 pounds. It was war horses. So the trade of tea for horses developed in the 600s, expanded in the 700s, became very important in the 1100s and 1200s. And where were horses to be had? Well, in Central Asia for sure. And so tea was going there. How about in Southwest China? Yep. They had horses among the minorities there. The Dali nation at one point during the Ming Dynasty seems to have had 97,000 horses. Oh, they also had another feature, war elephants. Now, when you think about war elephants, I don't know how many horses that's worth, but it sounds like it could be worth a lot of horses, especially if they used them like they used them right outside of Gondor, where, you know, they had them all tied together. Very effective use of war elephants. But you don't see that. It's not called the ancient tea elephant road because there weren't that many of them. It's the ancient tea horse road. So there was all this trading of tea for horses. And so you might be asking yourself as you think back to history, and as I start to paint the picture, well, wait a minute. You say that there's tea in Yunnan, we accept that. Some of us have actually been there and seen that. And this was before you had the bullet train and airplanes. How again were they getting these horses to other places? This stuff is important to think about because it required 2 or 3 things that we don't normally put together. So first off, you have to be youngish, and knowledgeable to have the right trails. Because to go from Yunnan and cross over the high passes into Tibet, a very difficult journey. That part of the journey was about 2,500 miles from the city of Sima, which is in southern Yunnan. That's a big old long journey. That doesn't mean that every caravan went every single mile. Some caravans only went 500 miles and then turned back. Some went 800, so forth. How do we know? Maybe this is all made up. Maybe this is later, all these trails. How do we really know historically that these roads were activated? Because people who were exploring from central China and going into Central Asia and going towards Southern Asia were discovering, hey, wait a minute. These are bamboo chopsticks that have to be from China. These are other goods that have to be from China. This is why in the 600s, the imperial court, all of a sudden, the light bulb comes on. There's caravans operating that we don't really understand. We better understand this stuff because every good caravan route needs a good tax on it, doesn't it? And hence, they started not only paying attention to this, by the Tang Dynasty, they were actively encouraging and actively taxing and actively supervising. Now, supervising is a loose term, isn't it, in those years? Because these places are still really wild and really hard on foot or on horse to cross, really dangerous. So these are all the reasons you wouldn't wake up one morning, hey, I want to join that caravan. Why would you join that caravan? My family has 10 siblings. We need me to go out and bring back some bacon. Well, not that type of bacon, but money. I got to do this. And I'm youngish. So, and in those years, it was primarily men that were doing or participating. Not always, though. As the years went by, more and more women also traveled in these caravans. It was really interesting because they were expected also to carry heavy things, which they did. And so remembering that this isn't traditional Han culture, that this is minority culture, different expectations came into play and different things happened. And that was one of them. So what was the other aspect of doing this? So let's think about this a minute. All of us can imagine, I'd love to go to Tibet. That's a fairly frequent statement you can hear. Because you're thinking, yeah, I'm going to get on my airplane. I'm going to fly into Lhasa. I'm going to make sure I have lots of tanks of oxygen just in case I get high mountain sickness. I'm going to be real prepared. I love taking this trip. What about if you're in the Tang Dynasty, pre-airplane? What is it that would drive you aside from, I want to bring money back for the family, maybe I want to do a little bit of exploration? The other thing is the transcendence of this trip. Imagine walking from Yunnan into Tibet or into any of these places. If you're walking from Yunnan into Vietnam or Burma or further south, you're seeing things that you haven't seen before. You're eating things that you haven't eaten before. And in some of those places, the transcendence of the place itself calls you. The Mekong River, which when it's in China is called Langsang River, in some parts is fabulously beautiful. You know, we think we have it special here in terms of the Grand Canyon. And granted, the Grand Canyon is one of the great sites in the world. But climbing into Tibet through the passes there is an incredible sight. So you had transcendence. What else did you have? You had Buddhism wafting down through these paths, through these ancient paths. And you had different forms from different areas. You had other thinking passing down through these paths. So it was kind of interesting to go on these trips. So I ask you this, because all of you are now in the Wild West thinking of, yeah, that might have been exciting to cross the US during the Wild West days. And then you think back to some of the television series. Oh no, that wasn't that exciting. That was really dangerous. Well, were there pirates? Were there aggressors trying to steal your goods? As the ancient tea horse trail developed, you on occasion, especially when China was less controlled, in other words, imperial control was falling apart, you would on occasion see pirates. That's ridiculous. It's as if Tibet became an ocean. Sorry about that. You'd see bandits. But that was rare. And remember, these caravans were large. And also remember, bandits living in these really inhospitable places, that's not a good place to do banditry. You want to do banditry, you know, close to a place like Chang'an, where there's lots of things to steal, and they're really good things, silk and gold and jade, you know, really nice stuff. Not in the remotest parts of China. So there was less of that sort of danger. The danger was the physicality of what you were trying to achieve. All of these caravans carried tea with them. Most of them did. So some Chinese scholar had the brilliant idea to say, hey, in the north, you had the Great Wall. And that was the physical Great Wall, you know, bricks and all that stuff, buried scholars in those bricks. Yeah, that was part of the Great Wall too. In the southern part of China, what took the place of that? And I'm talking about in the Southwest here. It was tea. Because tea essentially was why people didn't overrun these areas. It was the thing that they were looking for in these villages, in the area, especially in Tibet and beyond into India and in Southeast Asia. They weren't growing tea there. They weren't doing tea, and they grew to love tea. So this was like the cultural barrier, so to speak. And this is, so from these tea growing areas, they went out and spread the word. And in exchange for China, they earned horses. And for themselves, they earned currency. So this was the allure of doing this. Now, what about for the Chinese governments? Let's think about the Sung Dynasty for a minute. 960 to about 1179, something like that, maybe 1279. I always get these dates slightly confused. I think it's 1279. What happens there? Central Asia becomes restive. And old Genghis Khan starts to think about, you know what? China looks like it might be ready to be conquered. Looks like it might be a good place to get a few extra shekels. Let's get some horsemen together and go down and have some fun. So the Sung dynasty was engaged with fighting the Mongols. Why were they not worried about southern border incursions, specifically through Southeast Asia? Basically because this ancient tea horse trail served as a uniter of the peoples down there, and essentially allowed them not to worry about restiveness down there, because everybody was economically in relationship, ethnically multicultural, very diverse, but in relationship. What else was down there? The horses of Dali. So there was a Dali kingdom down there. And oh, good. I haven't used a large word yet. So it's time for a large word because I know you've been thirsting. Oh, wait a minute. Let's see if you've really been thirsting. Oh, you've been thirsting that way. But you've been thirsting for a large word. Caesaropapism. Wow. That was pretty large. And it has C and an AE in it. Not many of those words around. So what did that mean? In that area in Southwest China, the leaders, the big minority group leaders, led both in terms of religion and in terms of political power. And it was political power over religion. You could have, they were, in quotes, the popes of various religions. One political power. This was what Southwest China looked like. Now, eventually, later on, the Ming Dynasty went down there and tried to clean that up. Not completely successfully, but I'm trying to give you a picture historically of what was going on down there. I know you didn't think you were coming to a history lesson today, but this is really interesting in terms of the relationship of tea. And that's why we're talking about it today. However, this doesn't mean I should torture you and not allow you to drink tea. And the tea master signaled me several times that my history has gone a long time. So, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to bring up the beautifully adorned tea master, Biju.
哎，你好，Good morning, everyone. So we do Yunnan instant tea, huh? So we prepare the 5 gram, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, John.
Okay. Usual setup. This is red tea. 2 cups are all you need. A strainer is all you need. And then ability to control water temperature. Water temperature on this is 170 degrees. The timing for this one is 2 minutes, I believe.
4, 2, and 3.
4, 2, and 3. Thank you. Yes, I knew that I was just going to test you, but the producer says no testing of customers. You just get it right the first time.
Only after they've had caffeine.
Only after they've had caffeine. Absolutely correctly done. So, heating the cups. Thank you very much, by the way. Heating the cups and drawing the water. And so you're going to see the tea master dissipate the steam, aerate the water, get it down to about 170. Remember, when you err on temperature, you always err to be cooler rather than hotter. So if you don't have an exact way to measure, don't worry, just get it cool. You notice the nice rhythm that's going on here. When you brew, you aim for your rhythm. You establish an aim for your rhythm. And then the tea master, when she's ready, will pour it back into a kettle. And the kettle has the spout so she can control the pour. Puts the leaves in the heated cup. And again, these are ancient tree because we haven't talked about Sublime yet. It is ancient tree. These trees are around 2,000 to 2,200 years old. Pours on the side of the cup. Sets the timer for 4 minutes. And we start steeping. Beautiful, beautiful. Most of the leaves on top. And oh, you see other things in here. You see stems. Yes, indeed, you do see stems. So this tells you, this comes from an area in Ilau where these particular people will oxidize less than, say, a Qimen red. So they're oxidizing anywhere from 80 to 85%. They include stems from the plant in their final distribution. And why did they do that? Because from their perspective, those stems add flavor. If they had been taught by people from the Tea Research Institute, they'd have been taught not to do either of these two things. But because they established that before they were really influenced by people from Tea Institute, they do these two things. And so the teaching goes both ways, doesn't it? It's gone back towards the Tea Institute, and they say, yeah, this idea of oxidizing a little less and including stems produces an interesting flavor. Is it one village in the Ilau Mountains? Because I talk about the Ilau Mountains as if it's a unified one village mountain. It's not. It's several villages, and they all have, and different ethnicities, and in some villages, a mix of ethnicities, and they all have a certain number of ancient tea trees. And usually that number is under 12 ancient tea trees. Because, and these things grow in the forest. They don't grow right next to one another. In fact, they're not contiguous at all. They can be a mile or 2 or 3 apart. But they belong to an area that particular village controls. Handpicked, spring pick only for the teas that we pick up. For the most part, for the ancient trees, you would only pick spring anyway, although in a few places, the young ancient trees, so what am I talking about with young ancient trees? 900,000, 1,200, 1,300 years old. You might pick more than once, but for the ones over 1,500 years old, you're only really picking once, and you're only picking during the spring, and that's it. Not only is that it, it's economically viable to do that. That's the best way to do it. And the way that they supplement income in those villages is in places outside of where the forest is, they actually plant monoclonal tea bushes. In addition, they do grow their own vegetables, and very importantly, some of these villagers have the craft of growing traditional Chinese medicinal herbs. And they're able to craft those and sell those as well. So you have a lot of things going on in these villages. Some of them have fruit trees at lower elevations. Some of them actually have rice fields. So it's very interesting. All right, timer has gone off. The 4-minute timer is on. Master, not in a hurry, separating the tea leaves, tea water. What do we have here? Something with a beautiful color. A really beautiful color. We have something that is clear. Not clear, but is very clean looking. No particles really floating around here. It's either the quality arena. So we do every time. And what we're going to do is take enough of a taste, 170-degree taste, and we're going to evaluate. And in that evaluation, what we're going to do is think about where is it astringent in the mouth? What is the aftertaste? And how do you feel after you drink it? Okay, I've made a judgment about that. By the way, you should take out your notes from the last couple weeks. I'm going to take a second sip here. And the second sip, what I'm going to do is reinforce what I think I understood from the first sip, and then think about aroma and flavor. Oh my goodness. There is flavor in this. All right, it's your turn to brew. So on bag number 3, labeled Sublime, you have your tea leaves. Make sure you set your timer for 4 minutes. Prepare your cups. Just establish that nice rhythm. Okay, get your water, and what you're working on is to make sure that the steam is dissipated, water is oxygenated. You want to give this tea the best opportunity to show off itself. Take your leaves, bag number 3. Put them in the heated glass. Shake the glass, try and heat the leaves. If you have a kettle with a spout, pour the water into that, and then use that kettle to pour into the cup. If you don't worry about it. It's not an issue. You set your timer for 1 minute. Make sure that the recipient cups are heated. All right. So I've been talking about the ancient tea horse road and the relationship to the old years, or ancient, not ancient years, but 1,000 years ago. What about in modern times? Have those paths served a purpose? Yes. When they built the actual road from Yunnan into Tibet, they followed that path. So it was already kind of set out for them. And how useful was this path during World War II? In World War II, when they were trying to get supplies into China, they used this ancient tea horse path. How important was this path when countries tried to take advantage of China in the 1800s and early 1900s? You had the Europeans trying to dump cotton into China. What was happening in terms of trade? Well, nobody really from the West very well understood that there was so much trade moving along these roads. And that kind of added, or what it did was kind of a buffer against what the Europeans were trying to do in China. So these roads historically over time have had many significant uses for the Chinese in Southwest China. Now let's think about that leaf again. See how the veins all interconnect? One of the things they're discovering, even today, as they look for remnants of this ancient tea horse trail, is they realize, wait a minute, this is just like nature. You can only go so far from a village before you have to have another one, because for supply lines to work, for food to work, for tea to work. And so this gives you an idea. Over time, they're going to discover more and more parts of this road, because again, Yunnan is hugely still wild place. And by wild, I don't mean unlawful. It's very lawful. But what I mean is unexplored, not fully explored. And as you explore, you see these old, just like when they explore the Taklamakan Desert in northwest China, they discover old cities. They discover old towns that disappeared off the face of the earth because conditions change. Well, this is what they're looking at now, starting to look real hard at throughout South Asia. It's really, and even in Yunnan, when we took the group into the Aila Mountains, as we were leaving, we looked down this cliff and we could see this isolated building. And this isolated building was one of the remnants of the old tea horse road. And we saw several places where there were remnants. Timer's gone off. Separate the tea from the tea water. And now you have a chance to experience Sublime. Take your time as you go through the quality arena.
Jeremy shares, love the spindly, twiggy, dry leaves that managed a scent of burnt sugar and apple pie filling.
Burnt sugar and apple pie filling. The smell of the dry leaves that Jeremy points out. I like that she's captured this, because This tea, especially when you heat the leaves a little bit, you realize something special is gonna follow.
And she adds to that, wet leaves relinquish the aroma to the liquor, some honey there as well. And the first slurp, Sublime is right.
Ah, so and she continues, the wet leaves, they don't have so much of that apple spice. Instead, they have more of a honey. And the flavor, how did she characterize the
She
flavor? Is
said-
fine.
She said, well, from the first slurp, Sublime is the right term, I think.
Oh, I see.
for it.
Okay.
Yes.
From the first slurp, sublime is the right term. Thank you. It is. It absolutely is. It's very special. Go ahead.
Rob shares that the taste is as smooth as its aroma. The smell is cider-like sweet, and it feels wet, dry on my tongue. And the aroma is round.
Ah, aroma round for Rob, and they're on his tongue extremely smooth, and there's a wet dry, which I love this expression of how this reacts in the mouth. And I completely understand because I have the wet dry also. It's like under my tongue, I still have that, whether you call it the spice or the honey or the sweetness. And on the top, I got all that astringency, wet dry. Great catch and great characterization. So while you're continuing to think about this, what else did the ancient tea horse trail do for China? It expanded their soft power into that area. And by introducing Han culture, by learning to interact with the multi-ethnic groups in that area, and by sharing some of the great things from Chinese culture. Yes.
Jennifer asked, I may have missed it, but I'm curious if there is an ancient tree that produced Sublime, and if so, what's the estimated age?
Estimated age is between 2,000 and 2,200 years old. And it comes from a grove, which I believe it's 5 trees. I may be undercounting that. I think it's 5 trees though.
Jen E says, love the scent. I got notes of red plum and cherry with a hint of light caramel. On the taste to me, it is light and clean, mild citrus notes that fade over time on the back of the tongue. As the tea water developed, I got more and more of the flavor of goji berries.
Oh, very interesting. I love this comment by Jim. So let's start at the end because she comments on the flavor profile goes kind of from a cherry plum out to what was the next?
Goji berries.
To goji berries. And wow, I really get that because especially the goji berry at the end, I get. There was a part in the beginning I liked also about a burnt caramel.
Yes, with a hint. So in the scent, she is getting
Scent.
a hint of light caramel,
Okay,
and then the taste, light clean with mild citrus notes that
there you go. Taste of mild citrus notes that fade. And, more and more of you are starting to pick up that citrus. And truth be told, in the very beginning, I had a hard time, and this was years ago, hard time coming to that. But then over the years, I've come to that myself, particularly with these ancient tree reds, that flavor. When you say it, I can immediately identify. Love that, the totality of your description, Jim, because, and particularly ending on goji berry, because that really is a flavor that I can identify. All right. So we've covered a lot of ground today, and let's see how I'm doing. Yeah, I'm doing okay. We've covered actually quite a lot of ground. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on process with red tea today because we're gonna have 9 weeks. We still have 6 more weeks to go. And so I knew I could talk about the intricacies of process as we move through this. But since we're in Yunnan today, I particularly want to talk about the ancient tea horse road. You will, over the years, see more and more reference to that. And in a way that the way that developed, the way that China handled it, allowed it to really focus its attention on Central Asia. Central Asia is an important playground for Chinese influence. And trying to resist the ferocious peoples that came over the plains was an important historical thing for China to be doing. And so not having to worry about Southwest China and actually having a much more integrated relationship with Southwest China made that possible because they didn't have 2 real fronts. And you had a set of peoples who were already getting along, and you had this sense of multiculturalism in that area that didn't exist in other parts of China. So historically, and then I'll wrap up. This is the last of the history. I'm sorry that the history was so much today, but I thought let's cram history into one session. And I promise, until I forget this promise, which will probably be in 2 or 3 weeks, that I won't spend a lot of time on history again during these 9 weeks. So the Tang Dynasty was the height of multiculturalism in China because the Chinese at the political level accepted all sorts of different peoples and welcomed different peoples. But pre-Tang and post-Tang, it was always a little bit different. Nothing else quite resembled the cooperation and the relative peacefulness of what existed in Southwest China. So that's the message for today, the sublime message for today. As usual, you gifted me this evaluation of Sublime. It's a great evaluation of Sublime. And you're right on the money. Yes.
Jenny shares, I'm loving and support the history lesson.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
And in that vein, actually, is there anything about that green leaf picture that you wanted to build on? Was it a particular type of leaf? And I don't recall earlier, did you talk about?
No, it's not a type of leaf. It's not a tea
No,
leaf.
it's not.
I really just wanted you to look at the venation because that characterizes what was going on in Southwest China. And right now, we don't understand all those notes. And by the way, they're finding the same thing in the Taklamakan Desert. They're finding that they thought, villages were way distantly away from one another. And now they're finding remnants of other things in between. And so this makes human historical sense. All right. So next week, we move away from Yunnan and we go to Anhui Province. And we're going to get intimate next week. And the week following will be on bedrock. And the week following that, we'll be so happy we'll be combing our luxuriant bands. So these are the things we have to look forward to in the next few weeks. As usual, you all are the best. Stay healthy. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.
Take care, everybody. Bye.